I didn't put it in your mailbox.
Mr. Longshore.
Present.
Mr. Burke.
Here.
Mr. Dunhoft.
Here.
Ms. Skidmore.
Here.
Ms. Sudkamp.
Here.
Ms. Pitts.
Here.
Ms. Kyle.
Here.
Ms. Cahill. Mr. Cahill.
Here.
Mr. Brown. Mr. Blankenship.
Here.
Mr. Howard.
Here. For those of you who are in the audience who don't come here all the time, the special meeting of City Council, we can only handle those matters that are on the agenda for the call. We have two simple things to take care of first, then we'll be adjourned, and then we're going to go into the committee meeting to discuss what probably most of you are here to discuss us. Do you want to go to the committee, or you want me to go to Mark with this first? The Crescent Springs and the Ellesmere Police contract. It's not the police committee, but
Can we do a pledge first?
for a special meeting? Sure. Let's all rise and pledge the flag.
We have a lot of soldiers that aren't going to
All
come
right.
for Christmas.
All in favor.
I
pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
It does feel more normal after we do that. Thank you. Mr. Fields.
Yeah, there are two items on here, the Crescent Springs policing contract and the Ellesmere dispatching contract for municipal orders, both of these agreements. The mayor, I have the one from Crescent Springs. It's already been signed by Mayor Collette. We're still working with one item on the Ellesmere dispatch contract. We're meeting, Mr. Engelman and I are meeting next Monday with Ellesmere officials to work that one item out, and I think we'll get that done. So those are the two municipal orders.
So, Mr. Wickman, if we approve the municipal order, then it's subject to finishing negotiations with Ellesmere, but we have it done by the end of the year, so it becomes effective January 1st. So we have two municipal orders. Mr. Wickman.
Yes, sir. The first one is a municipal order of the city of Erlanger in Kenton County, Kentucky, approving and ratifying the attached interlocal agreement for the city of Erlanger and the city of Crescent Springs for the provision of police services.
Motion be to adopt and allow us to sign the municipal order. Motion by Ms. Pitts, second by Ms. Kyle. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Wickman.
Next one is a municipal order of the city of Erlanger in Kenton County, Kentucky, approving and ratifying the attached interlocal agreement of the city of Erlanger and the city of Ellesmere for dispatch services.
And once again, we're continuing our long-term relationship with our neighbors in Ellesmere. Motion by Ms. Sudkamp, second by Ms. Pitts. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That being the end of our agenda, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Burke, second by Mr. Dunhoff. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Now, the administration committee is what we're going to talk about tonight. We have a tradition and a procedure here that if you all wish to speak, and you may, we encourage you to speak, you need to sign up on the sign-up sheet in the back so that we have your name and address properly for our minutes so we know who you are and where you live. So because everything's being televised, that way we have accurate minutes of what takes place here. So if you think you're going to talk, please go back and sign on the sheet. And with that, I'll turn it over to the administrator. Yes, Renee.
Would it be appropriate to mention that if they sign up and they choose not to speak,
They don't
when
have
it's
to
their
speak.
turn, they don't have to?
Right.
And they can say that something's already been said or your issue has already been addressed?
Absolutely. Okay, administration committee.
Mr. Hahn, where are you out there? You want to speak to this document for us a little bit?
Well, the first thing we were going to do once Dave got up here was I was going to make a comment.
Okay, please do.
One of the jobs that we have to do in city government, especially local government, is plan for the future. And forever there has been line items in our budget to provide the minimal funding necessary for planning for the future. A lot of the zoning in Erlanger has been in place for years. But there's two things that happen with land. Number one is sooner or later the ownership changes down the road. And number two is change happens. We don't want the change to happen to us. The city likes to have a hand in on how that change occurs. We identified an area of the city of Erlanger right across the street from the city building as an area to study. And we have a a small group study contract with the Northern Kentucky Area Planning Commission. They're the professionals in this area to help us study this area and propose what could be a change to the zoning rules. This is not, legislation is not ready to be passed yet. City Council isn't ready to decide if they're going to do it. And tonight we're going to have the results of the study that we've had our citizens working with and NKAPC working with, and the final result of the study is going to be presented to us tonight for the city then to start deliberating on it. But the old pattern of zoning and planning would be a developer comes in and buys up a hunk of land and then comes into the city and says, we want you to change the zoning so we can put these apartments in on what this used to be a farm, or which is kind of how Erlanger grew in some of our areas. We want to stay on the front side of that curve and already have zoning in place for what we would like to see happen 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now on that parcel of property, if and when the economy loosens up and the developer does want to come in and change things. And that's all this is. It's a study to see if this area that we're studying is appropriate to have a different kind of zoning in place. It has no effect on the people who are there now. It has no effect necessarily on what they're doing, because it's a zoning rule, and the zoning rule is your grandfathered. So you can continue doing what you're doing. Mr. Hahn.
Excuse me, may I
Yes.
just make one comment?
Sure.
Please. I have been on the Dixie Fix, the Renaissance Committee, whatever you want to call it, for Dixie Highway for probably close to 15 years now, long before I was on council. If you all will take a look at the Dixie Highway, if you would take a look at that god-awful underpass, you know, had there been more vision in the past, and I'm not casting any dispersions, but had there been more thought given to the Dixie Highway 20 or 30 years ago, we wouldn't now just be seeing the changes. We're doing this for you, not against you, if it comes to pass. It's a study. Thank you.
Part of the planning years and years ago, when I first became mayor, let's see, I got on city council, 1989, and one of the first things we wanted to do was to align Garvey Avenue and McAlpin. So we didn't have those two lights 5 feet apart up there right in front of St. Henry School. It was terrible for the pedestrians, the kids crossing the streets, and stopped up traffic. Guess what? 19, 20 years later, we got it done with the help of grants and planning. So we've now finished that product. We also were able to, as part of this project, buy the what was Gillespie's gas station, and that's gone now. It's now city-owned property, can be used for a park, for green space. We can also develop it with the type of development we want down the road. We've done the same type of thing over here on maybe you all don't know it or aren't used to it, but on Houston Road behind us here, that used to go up to the cinemas. Remember when you used to go up to the cinemas, that concrete plant that sat to the right that used to spew dust in? We own that now in order to develop, to enhance the development of that site, which we think is the biggest area of Erlanger to be redeveloped probably during our lifetime. And we had to get rid of the concrete plant, so we got rid of it. That's all part of the zoning process. Those are the kind of things we have to do. And that was 7 or 8 years in the coming. So we're trying to look ahead. David.
I don't think I can explain much more eloquently than you did, but this is just another a process in the phasing of this, and I'm sure that the folks from Northern Kentucky Area Planning Commission will explain the phases of how, what occurs next after they get to the plan. I would assume that that's will be a part of their presentation where we go after this presentation, and then you all would be expected of you all. They're here, Andy will be the presenter for this tonight. So feel free to ask him some questions.
Have at it, Andy.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, fellow council members. My name is David Backman. I'm the senior planner with NKAPC, and I was the project manager for the Commonwealth Station project. As the mayor alluded to, we are here tonight to present to you the results of the year-long, just over a year-long study of new zoning regulations for the area that's referred to as Commonwealth Station. Before I begin, I need to say thank you to the members of the steering committee that were an integral part of this process. And I've got their names listed here, so I don't forget anyone. Mayor Rouse, Councilman Randy Blankenship, Councilwoman Patty Suekamp, Planning Commission Member Diane Brown, Megan Sola, Jean Schilling, Brian Folkenkamp, Philip Rees, Mark Stewart, and David Connor. So thank you very much. If you're here in the audience, and I'm sure if they're not here, they understand how thankful we are for their sacrifice. This steering committee was the driving force behind this project. As the mayor mentioned, NKTC staff was just brought in to facilitate this process, to provide the technical support and professional assistance to the city and to the steering committee and to draft the code. The product, which I'm about to present to you tonight, is the result of the committee's discussions and also sometimes the difficult decisions they had to make in order to implement this vision. I also need to say thank you to Ball State University for providing some of the graphics that you will be seeing this evening. Before we get into it, staff wanted to conduct some random interviews to see what folks in the Cincinnati area thought about Erlanger. And Sherry's going to start.
Do you know where the city of Erlanger is?
Yes, it's over near Florence.
Erlanger is? By the airport. Okay. Name of business in the city of Erlanger? No.
Dixie Chill.
What'd she say?
Dixie Chill. Well, about Luke's.
Okay.
Sewing and vacuum repair.
Okay, okay. Do you...
Swans Florence, I don't know if it's Ellesmere or Erlanger. The Super Bowl.
Used to be a Kmart, is it still there?
Yes, Google or whatever, do you think you'd be able to do that?
I think so.
Yes, or looking it up on MapQuest? Okay.
Is it along 75?
Yeah, yeah.
Towards the airport?
Right.
The old movie theater I used to go to as a kid on the highway there and saw Star Wars there.
No, it's pretty spread out.
Okay.
They don't have a general area that's like a meeting area that's like Fountain Square or something like that, or a municipal building that would offer things, that's out there and visible.
Well, I don't think there's a lot of shopping there. I really only go there for bowling. I think of Florence more as the shopping area, and Erlanger is more residential.
What kind of comes to your mind? The airport? In Northern Kentucky, do you do any of your day-to-day activities there, shopping or otherwise?
No.
To go to like usually Florence Mall, Mall Road area. So Swans, I go to Swans a lot.
Okay.
And I have to go to the repair for my sewing machine and my sweeper. So
good.
Yeah, yeah. Keep that tuned up. So
okay, great.
That's basically where I go, and then of course my friends have their children in St. Henry.
Every once in a while, I usually go bowling over there.
Not really. I went to Field and Stream the other day.
So, as you can see, most folks knew about Erlanger and roughly where it was at, but their idea of Erlanger was still pretty abstract. Exactly where it was and what Erlanger has to offer, they really didn't have an idea of that. But that sort of illustrates the point that we're going to get to with this project in a minute. Tonight, I'm going to basically take you from conception of this project through to where we are tonight. Starting with the background, talking a little bit about form-based codes, and then actually getting into the process and the code itself, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So, in 2012, and this goes back to the video that we just saw, in 2012, city staff sat down with NKAPC staff to have a discussion about this area around I-70, 175, and the Commonwealth Avenue interchange. And at the time, the cities felt that this was a very important gateway to the city. However, there was a general dissatisfaction with the built environment and the message that this was sending to residents and visitors who came to Erlanger. The city staff expressed a desire to investigate the zoning in this area and possibly implement new zoning regulations, and specifically referred to form-based codes as a potential option. The city asked staff if this was something that we could facilitate for them, which it was. The city and NKPC staff entered into a contract to then move that process forward. Now, you've obviously heard me say this a couple of times, and that's the idea of form-based code. And some of you may know what form-based codes are. For some of you, this might be a completely new concept, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time to go over what they are and why they're so important. Conventional zoning, this is the zoning that you and I grew up with that's been in existence for basically as long as zoning has been in existence. It has been an idea that came around back in a time when the automobile was a dominant thing in a person's life. Conventional zoning obviously divides cities up into zones. Each zone then designates what uses are permitted or not permitted in that zone. And then it stipulates things such as setbacks, heights, landscaping, off-street parking, those kinds of things. What this did, though, was that this left the physical design of buildings up to developers. It segregated land uses. There was really a disconnect between the city's long-term vision and the regulations that were in place to implement that vision. And what you got is then these pods of single-use zones. Pods of residential, pods of commercial, pods of office. Historically, the purpose of zoning has been less of an urban design tool and more of a way of protecting private property values. Zoning presumably maps for the future. That for many property owners, the only benefit was ensuring that potentially harmful and noxious industrial uses could not locate on their neighboring properties, protecting their properties. Consequently, conventional zoning has produced a culture of isolation, a patchwork of single-use, segregated districts, private enclaves with little vehicular pedestrian connectivity, and it also guaranteed automobile dependency. Form-based codes, on the other hand, begin with Erlanger's vision. This is a chance for the city and its residents to create a place that's unique for Erlanger. Certainly a property owner has an interest in using their property for an economically productive use. But the city and the residents also have an interest in creating a place that looks nice. Because the way the city looks to the outside world certainly has as much to do with the economic vitality of the city as a whole as the individual property owner has interest in making a living off of their property. And a form-based code basically brings these tools, these interests together. The city's desire to create something unique and a property owner's interest in using their land for an economically productive use. Again, it's the city and the citizens that determine the design of the buildings. Mixed land uses are a major component of form-based codes. It's based directly on the vision and it incorporates walkable principles. And the result is, rather than isolated uses, there's an emphasis on mixed uses, as I mentioned. Rather than high-density multifamily, being stigmatized as low income and crime infested, they are a desirable component of the community and a critical element to the success of the area. Rather than single-family homes being spread farther and farther apart, they're brought closer and closer together, reintroducing people to their neighbors. And rather than a developer dictating the design of buildings, a developer that may not have any sort of stake in the financial longevity of a community, again, it's the city that decides the vision and then creates the regulations to have that implemented. And this is important for a number of reasons. Things are changing. Populations are getting older. Younger folks are beginning to enter the workforce. We've all heard of the silver tsunami. As the largest segment of the population, the needs and desires of the baby boomers have always dominated local and national trends. And obviously this will not change anytime soon. As this generation gets older, the AARP reported that baby boomers desire more livable communities to maintain their independence. This includes a pedestrian environment, easy access to grocery stores, recreation, are all important elements. Likewise, millennials are also driving the trend. CNN reports that millennials are looking for walkable communities. Forbes' most attractive cities for young professionals, that list that they put out, 9 of the top 12 ranking cities have a common theme connecting them, and that's less dependence on the automobile. The problem with these trends and with the current regulations is that in order to create a place that might be desirable for these folks, is unfortunately illegal under the current zoning regulations. You can't have mixed uses. You have to have season parking, and people have to get in their automobiles to get to the places where they need to go. And cities across the nation have been adopting these form-based codes. According to a list compiled by placemakers up here on the screen, 279 form-based codes have been adopted across the country. While form-based codes are over 30 years old, 84% of them have been adopted since 2003. Communities large and small are adopting form-based codes. Miami, Florida has adopted a citywide form-based code. Probably one of the first major metropolitan areas to do an entire city under a form-based code. Murfreesboro, Tennessee, they've adopted a form-based code for along one of their corridors. Cincinnati, Ohio, closer to home, has just recently adopted form-based codes for several of their neighborhoods, and they're looking to expand that. And also Bellevue, Kentucky has adopted form-based codes for their downtown area. And it's building places such as this. It's building places that are focused more on mixed use, more on living closer to where you work, more on commercial and office located next to one each other to limit the needs of getting your car and drive. And a focus on density, not shying away from the fact that multifamily density is a critical component to make commercial areas successful. Creating a form-based code is a lot different than a conventional zoning update. Typically, when there needs to be an update to conventional zoning, there's a few players involved. Certainly city staff, maybe a council member or two, a developer, or a private property owner. They all get together, meet for a week or maybe a couple months to put something together and then go through the process. The form-based code process is very much different. It involves the entire city to create a form-based code. Months are spent developing a vision and setting the parameters for the code. After the visioning is done, an even longer process of putting that vision into regulations is conducted. For the Commonwealth Station project, there were 2 phases. Phase 1 was the master planning and visioning. The steering committee that I mentioned earlier met for 3 months to get up to speed on what we were doing. Then there was a very intense 2-day design process called the charrette to develop that vision, to interact with the residents. And then there was also a public input meeting after that to garner more input. Following that phase 1, phase 2 was the actual drafting of the code. The steering committee met 9 more times on an almost monthly basis to hammer out all the issues that we had to get through. This also included another public input meeting towards the end of the process, where input that the committee received from there was also inputted and made changes to the code as well. There are 4 basic steps for form-based coding: scoping, assessing existing conditions, visioning, creating regulations, and adoption. Scoping basically sets the parameters for and the framework for the work that needs to be accomplished. Again, with the Commonwealth Station, this was appointing a city-appointed steering committee, conducting the initial investigation, dividing the project up into 2 phases, and identifying what needed to be done during those 2 phases and when public input would be appropriate and how that public input was going to be gathered. Assessing the existing conditions involved the steering committee, obviously just getting out there and hitting the pavement, looking at what the existing buildings were like in the area and documenting what they liked, what they didn't like, what features were good, what features were not good. And then also examining the existing regulatory framework, looking at the current zoning, the current comprehensive plan, existing land use, things of that nature. Visioning and creating regulations was a big part of that first phase. And it started with just a discussion with the committee to get things rolling with the students from Ball State. The first thing we asked them to do was just talk about some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the area. They also conducted just a preliminary visioning exercise. And again, this was strictly done to get the ball rolling, to generate ideas, to start the discussion with the design team from Ball State. During the design charrette process, the design team actively engaged with the citizens who did show up to the event, and they illustrated numerous realistic ideas to present to the public. The follow-up public meeting, which was held here a couple weeks after the design charrette, was very well attended, and additional feedback was gathered from that as well. All this information was then incorporated into an overall vision for the area. And the design team produced some graphics to illustrate examples of what Commonwealth Station could be. I want to stress right at this point that these are not specific development plans. These are just illustrations to show concepts of what could be done in Commonwealth Station and to base the rest of the code on. The committee during this time had some very spirited discussions. This is obviously what you expect when you have folks from different backgrounds and different interests all in the same room and working together. Every aspect of the code that you have in front of you was discussed in some part by the committee. There was also plenty of things that the committee discussed that ended up not making it into the code. Some major discussion points by the committee was the boundary, how to keep things flexible, design elements, permitted uses, drive-throughs, things of that nature. Changes were also made to the final code in front of you based on input we received from the public. A major thing that we heard from the second public meeting was the overall boundary code. The committee heard that. After that meeting, they went back and they decided to make some changes to that boundary. Permitted uses and multifamily density were also issues that came up that were resulting in changes to the final code. And finally, where that brings us here tonight with the adoption of the code. This is the first meeting in what is going to be a fairly long adoption process. There's obviously a long way to go before this thing can actually become finalized, and there will definitely be more opportunities for public input after this. At the very least, at the Kent County Planning Commission, and also at meetings like this as we move forward. And so now I actually get to talk to you about the code and the regulations itself. First of all, I want to just touch on a few things that this code will and will not do. First of all, this code will not take anyone's property, and it will not force anyone to sell their property. What it will do is it will allow property owners to sell their property when and to whom they choose. Basically the same way it is now. That nothing is going to change their choices that they have now in terms of the disposition of the property or after the code is adopted. This will not create development or funding for development. What this will do is it will create a predictable framework, and it will create protection for future investment by property owners, developers, and the city. If property owner A wants to create a $100,000 addition, and they don't know if property owner B is going to put in a nice addition or if they're going to put in a metal building, that may keep them back from spending that investment and putting that investment into their properties. What this does for property owner A is if they're going to make a nice addition, they know that property owner B is also going to have to do something at least of the same quality, therefore protecting their investment into their own property. This will not force any of the current businesses to close. What this will do is it will allow the type of development that is envisioned for the area. Each one of these items is sectioned in the code. Some of these are more important than others, so I will go through some of these pretty fast, and other ones I will spend a little bit more time on. The legal and application provisions, it sounds pretty boring, but there are some important points that I want to relay to you. First of all, this code will not apply to any of the existing single-family homes in this area. Additions, renovations, accessory structures, maintenance, anything like that can all be done under the current R1G zone. Also, if there is an existing single-family home, which for some unfortunate reason is damaged or destroyed, that single-family home can be rebuilt as a matter of right without going through any public hearings or receiving any variances or waivers to any sort of codes. The second point is that each development shall in themselves comply with the regulations, but shall not require the retrofitting of the entire building to meet the code. Basically what this means is that, for example, if a business is putting an addition onto the rear to add some more storage space, they won't be required to bring the facade of the front of the building up to meet the requirements of the code. Now they will still have to meet the building height, setbacks, and things that apply directly to that addition in the back, but in no way are they going to be required to go back and retrofit their building until such time as that aspect of the building, the front of the facade, is eventually upgraded. And then that is when the new regulations will be applicable. Also, normal maintenance, repairs, things of that nature can be done to existing structures without needing to bring those up into compliance with the existing code. There are several different levels of review within the code. Basically, there are 7 different levels of work that can be done within the code, going from minimal changes of use all the way down to new construction. And based on whatever is being proposed, that will then have a bearing on what sort of development review process that the project goes through. All of the levels identified in green are fairly minor additions, or they might not even require any exterior work. Those can all be approved through the building and zoning approval permit process that the city already has in place, as any business would go through at this point. The larger additions, level 5, 6, and 7, because of the detail and because of the scope and size of those projects, those would have to go through a stage 2 development plan review, which is submitting plans to the Kent County Planning Commission staff for review and recommendation. The recommendation comes back to the city staff for their final approval or disapproval. This is very similar to what planned unit developments go through now in the city. Lakemont, places like that, they currently go through that process right now. Variances and modifications are also very important. Basically, any modification that meets the definition of a variance, that's obviously something that can be taken to the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment can grant a modification from those plans. Those are your dimensional terms, your height, your setbacks, things of that nature. But there's other things in this code, because it's a form-based code, that aren't dimensional in nature, and the Board of Adjustment does not have authority to grant waivers from those. In those cases, the city staff is authorized by the code to grant minor modifications. I want to be clear that this isn't giving Mark or David or Mr. Fields a magic wand to approve or disapprove anything that comes before them. The code sets very clear limits on the scope or the extent that those waivers can grant, and also sets forth very specific approval criteria. Everything within a form-based code is tied to a regulating plan, and this is the regulating plan for Commonwealth Station. This map basically identifies different areas where different building form standards apply. Again, this is based on the community vision that was developed through the design charrette process. There are 5 separate sub-districts identified within this regulating plan. There's 3 core sub-districts and 2 urban sub-districts. The core sub-district is approximately 6.5 acres. It is bounded by Commonwealth Avenue, Baker Street, and Erlanger Street. This is looked at as the main street for the area. The idea here is to serve as a nucleus for the rest of the development within the Commonwealth Station area by creating development that consists of single-story, 2-story, multi-story buildings with retail and office uses on the first floor, office and residential uses on the second floor. Since this area is looked at as the main street of the area, the steering committee felt that it was very important that development in this area be done the right way. As I mentioned earlier, being flexible was one of the common themes that we talked about in this process. And I'll point out that this building placement this is the only sub-district where this occurs. But again, it was felt that because this is the main street, since whatever happens here is going to set the tone for the rest of the area, that in at least this very place, the building placement, creating that form was very important and something that was worth dictating within the zoning ordinance rather than leaving it to open for more flexibility. So basically what you have here is, the idea is that development would occur around the private access drives, which are identified in the light blue, to create more of a focal point in the center of the area, and then to have more organic development around the periphery of the sub-district. This will give this area a nice focal gathering point in the middle, and then we'll proceed to then develop organically, like I said, around the periphery. The second sub-district is the Core 2 sub-district. This is approximately 5 acres. It is on the south side of Commonwealth Avenue. It includes this building as well as the office building next door. This sub-district is a lot more flexible than the first Core sub-district. Again, the primary intent is to allow for mixed use, but also multifamily, high-density multifamily would also be a permitted use in this sub-district. The Core 3 area is approximately 11 acres. It's located on the south side of Baker Street, east of Erlanger Road, and there it goes down Riggs Road a little bit. This begins the transition from the more intense core areas to the less intense urban areas. Mixed uses are still permitted here, where the scale and the size at which they're permitted is a lot less than what is permitted in the core area. The urban 1 zone, this begins the more focus on residential density rather than mixed uses. The focus of this is to create a critical density of rooftops within this area to support the commercial area further to the south. The urban 1 area includes the existing apartment complex along Centonia Drive, as well as areas to the southeast of Riggs Road. The intensity and density of residential uses within this area can vary widely. However, everything is going to be smaller and on a more neighborhood scale to be located within the closer proximity to the residential neighborhood. There are the ability to introduce some smaller neighborhood-oriented commercial uses. This is along the lines of those little corner stores that you see in Covington, nothing larger than anything of that scale. In the urban 2 sub-district, the primary intent of this is to maintain the existing fabric of the residential neighborhood while promoting slightly higher densities in the form of attached single-family homes. The scale and character of this sub-district is definitely very complementary to what currently exists in the single-family areas. There are 5 basic building forms that are permitted within Commonwealth Station. Flex-use buildings, that's just the planner's fancy way of saying mixed-use buildings. Those are Obviously, mixed uses, commercial on the first floor, residential on the second floor, but in the code, it does not necessarily need to be a mix of uses, and that's why it's called flex use. It can be all just commercial, office, it does not have to have a residential component necessarily. Wood work buildings, which is similar to home occupations, although the primary difference is that these buildings are specifically constructed with the commercial use in mind, whereas a home occupation, the home is retrofitted to fit the home occupation, as opposed to, like I said, this being constructed with the commercial use directly in mind. Multifamily can take a number of different forms. I do want to mention that that the intent is that the multifamily is not be the low-end type of multifamily that we've heard so much about that is not desired in the neighborhood. And that's certainly something that is addressed in the code that we'll get to. Single family allows a single family attached, detached. We'll go into a little bit of what that means. And public and civic, those are your churches, obviously, your libraries, your larger scale gauges, things of that nature. Flex use buildings are permitted within all of the 3 core sub-districts, as well as the urban 1 sub-district. Within the core sub-districts, larger mixed-use buildings are permitted. Within the core 1 sub-district right across the street here, a 50,000 square foot footprint building could be constructed. As you get to the core 2 and the core 3, those footprints then come down. Whereas in the core 3, the maximum building footprint you can have for a mixed-use building is 8,000 square feet. While I'm talking about flex use, I'm going to talk about permitted uses. Every building form has a list of permitted uses. However, there's some very key differences. Within the current zoning, and we'll use the SC zone as an example, there are 52 permitted uses, and they're very specific uses. Toy store, variety store, hobby shop, those kinds of things. If someone has a use that's not listed within those 52 uses, it's not permitted, and they have to come to the city, and the city has to go through the planning commission process to add a single use to their code. The Commonwealth Station, that list of permitted uses is only 23 permitted uses, which is a lot shorter than 52. However, the Commonwealth Station uses a lot more of the general use groups. And what that means is that there are very specific definitions for each use group that set forth the scale and the scope of an activity. And then if a proposed use meets the parameters set by that definition, it is then considered a permitted use. So keeping that in mind, if you have a use group that says retail sales and service is permitted, think about all of the possibilities that is encompassed within that retail sales and service. It's no longer limited just to those 52 uses that are specifically listed. It allows for a shorter code. It easier allows for changes in businesses and technology, and it saves time and money for businesses that don't have to go through the planning commission process just to add a single use to the code in order to locate it in an area where they desire. This is the live-work building form. The live-work buildings are permitted within the core 3 and the urban 1 sub-districts. The live-work buildings, they can look a lot like the mixed-use buildings, but more often than not, they take on more of an attached townhome type of feel. The scale of these is also a lot smaller than those flex-use buildings. The intent of these live-work units is to accommodate smaller commercial endeavors that rise just above that home occupation level, but don't quite meet the scale of a building that a mixed-use building provides. Some examples of this would be a small shop, an artist studio, with the owner living on the premises, things of that nature. And the height and massing of these buildings is very similar to that you would see with attached townhomes. The small scale and the scope of these buildings is also reflected in the permitted uses. There's a total of 6 listed use groups within the live-work building form, and again, this ranges from artist studios to offices. But generally speaking, none of that heavy retail sales and service uses that you would find in the 4 sub-district. This is the multifamily building form. Multifamily buildings can obviously take on a lot of different forms. Multifamily is allowed in the Core 2, Core 3, and Urban 1 sub-districts. Just like the just like the flex-use buildings, these are all intended to be up against the street. These buildings also have limits on the mass of how big they can get. So while there's no specific maximum density listed within the zoning ordinance, there are practical limits on the density based on those mass limits as well as setbacks and off-street parking requirements that they would need to provide. Basically, the more density that someone would want, the more creative they would have to be in designing and laying out a multifamily development. Generally speaking, the more time that someone puts into designing and developing a multifamily product, the higher end those units are going to be in terms of rents. Detached and attached single family are also permitted. Obviously, detached and single family is a fairly ubiquitous building form that's already currently permitted in almost 95% of Erlanger. What's different here is the attached single family, and these are permitted in the Core 3, the Urban 1, and the Urban 2. The building size and scale, again, is very indicative of what could currently go there as a detached single family zone. What this does is this basically just allows the density to increase slightly by allowing attached single family, but without being too out of character with the adjacent neighborhood. And finally, public and civic standards. Again, these are obviously your office, or I'm sorry, your church and your libraries. Generally speaking, the larger ones are going to be in your downtown, or your downtown the core areas, and then as you get into the other sub-districts, they're allowed, but obviously at a lot smaller footprints to be more in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. The steering committee did decide on some pretty basic architectural standards, and these only apply to the flexed use and to the live work units. Basically, the primary permitted uses have to be high quality materials, brick, EFIS, architectural glass, those kinds of things. Corrugated metal, synthetic or flimsy wood siding, those aren't permitted. Public entrances also play a very important role. This is obviously the place where the public realm meets the private realm, and therefore, in your experience of a building, this is obviously one of those places that should stand out. There's some very basic things that the community decided in order to emphasize the public entrances, things like oversized entry features, awnings, things of that nature. All types of roof designs are permitted. The only roof design that the steering committee felt would have been out of character with the area where the mansard is, such as the one you see on the right-hand side there. The Commonwealth Station Code does contain its own sign regulations. Basically, all manner of signs are permitted, freestanding signs, wall signs. What is different here is the projecting signs and the sandwich board signs. This brings signage down to a much more pedestrian level that's not allowed under the current zoning or anywhere else in the city. General regulations generally apply to all the sub-districts. They cover things such as accessory uses, mechanical equipment, screening, lighting, things of that nature. We don't really need to get into too much detail there. As I mentioned earlier, all of the use groups have very specific definitions. This is important. There's a pretty lengthy section at the back of the code that just goes over definitions and prohibited uses. This is important because obviously if the user comes in, you want some pretty clear standards on whether or not they fit into a use group or not. And so these definitions provide clarity and consistency with the concepts within the code. There are prohibited uses within the zoning ordinance. For the most part, they fall within the two categories. Either they're automobile-oriented or the uses are associated with negative secondary effects such as crime, loitering, repeat traffic, that kind of thing. This is a list of the permitted uses. I won't go through them all, but a couple of the big ones are bingo halls, payday loan shops, cash checking facilities, sweepstakes cafes, things of that nature. So even if all of these uses would fall into the definition of, say, retail sales and service, because it's specifically listed as a prohibited use, it would not be permitted within that area. So that was quite a lengthy talk on me, but as they say, when you don't talk, there's a lot of stuff that's ends up not being said, so I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
First, I'd like to we'll deal with questions from council, then we'll get the list of folks who've signed up. Johnny.
Okay, I noticed on the prohibited uses, I saw one up there, wasn't up there, and we really worked hard to get out of this city, and I didn't see it up there. That's adult stores, things of that nature. That was not listed up there as prohibited.
How could how could the steering committee miss that?
Well, we didn't actually talk about that. But the reason why that's not listed here is because that's actually covered by a completely different section of the zoning ordinance already.
Okay, I just wanted that clear, because I didn't see it up there. I was concerned because
it does not as a glaring omission, but it is regulated by section or Article 9. Thank you. Thank you.
Vicki.
I have two concerns. First of all, the historical buildings in the area, are they protected?
There would not be any special protection offered to those buildings, as there currently is under the current regulations. There's no special protection for them now either.
And the other one is, you talk about the high end of the multi-family, whatever you want to call that.
Yes.
That also occurred near to where I live. That it started out as a high end, and since then it has gone down. And that's a real concern with me. And I think some of the residents have expressed that concern also, that we want to make sure that there's some kind of protection, some kind of element there that's going to protect us, that this stays high-end apartments and not disintegrate into the low end like so many of them have.
Okay.
Just something to think about. I mean,
Okay.
you know.
Anybody else on council?
Yeah, I got one more.
Yeah.
I noticed on Riggs Avenue,
Yes.
okay, how, if I'm not mistaken, if you're going down Erlanger Road, you're taking right on Riggs, on the left, you got the attorney's office, but then after the attorney's office, you got residential. But across the street, it looks like that whole right side going down to the first street on your right is where you could mix use business in.
Oh, sorry, you don't have to describe that again.
Right here.
Yeah.
These right here.
Urban
These right
one.
here. On the right side of that. Is that, I just got kind of concerned, is that just going to be residential, or is that mixed-use residential and business?
Within that pink area, that would allow for more of the mixed uses.
Okay.
But again, it's in kind of that transition zone where you're getting more of the small scale, not the larger scale that you find in the core, the Main Street area.
Well, how many blocks does that go down?
It looks like it's down the First Street.
First Street on the right?
It doesn't get to Cardinal Court.
It doesn't.
The house you're looking at off Riggs, they've got lots that are 2 and 3 times longer than the one on the lot.
Right. The ones that go all the way.
There is a lot of wasted land there.
Right.
But it's all privately owned, and the people, there's some of them rent. But like I'm saying, there's a lot of land in there, but they would move, we're some kind of damn dictatorship.
Mayor, I think that everyone thinks that we have like bulldozers, like ready to go and buy people's houses and push them over. That's, at least in my opinion, that's not the case. We're setting up, as it stands, everything can stay exactly as it is. You have a house, you have that land, it's yours to do with it what you wish, as it is right now.
I ask you a question.
So we have sir, you'll go to council first, then we're going to do the sign-up sheet. So we're going to do it in that process. Go ahead.
You sign up? Okay, he'll call you out. He'll call you.
You done? You, Patty?
Yes, I know y'all don't live in Taylor Mill, but that's where I grew up. The city of Taylor Mill has taken a very, very, very strong approach to zoning their entire city prior to anything even happening. And it happens to affect my property that is the only piece of property that's left from my grandparents. And I had hoped that my children would be able to build houses on it. Well, it's been zoned neighborhood commercial. So, but with my council hat on and being where I have been in this city and seeing how hard it is to get anything accomplished, federally, statewide, whatever, just like I said before, my explanation of the Dixie Highway is a perfect example. I have worked my butt off for 15 years, and we are just now getting money enough to get the sidewalks safe, get some safe pedestrian lighting. They're not turned on yet, but it's happening. So Taylor Mill has taken this very, very approach, and that they are looking ahead. That's all we're doing, folks. We're looking ahead.
Anybody else on council have anything? Yeah.
I just had, I was not aware that the historical properties were not protected under the current zoning. I did not know.
I'm trying to think in my head where there are historical properties in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Maybe the house I grew up in.
I don't know, but I did
The
not.
committee did contact the Historical Society, and it doesn't look like from the documentation that they got any response back. So either that says there isn't anything there that they're concerned about, or...
Okay.
Anybody else on council? The first sign up was Lucy.